What is going on, everybody? Let me know if you can hear me and see me all right. Hope everybody's doing well out there. Matthew, what's up? Josh, what is going on? Steven, welcome. Perfect. Glad everything is working well. We are, of course, here for some severe weather. It's been a quiet winter so far, not much to talk about, but we are going to see a return of severe weather over the next couple of days, starting really early tomorrow morning, going through at least Friday. Friday is the peak of this system. We might see some a little bit last into Saturday, but it looks like Thursday, Friday is going to be our main 2 days of this system. We'll wait a couple minutes here, let some folks trickle in. Hope everyone's doing well. Hope everybody's having a happy new year. As I said, it's been pretty quiet here this winter. Not a lot of forecast discussions to do. And it looks like after this, we'll have another quiet stretch for a little bit. But it's going to be an active couple days here, starting tomorrow morning, going through at least Friday, likely into Saturday a little bit as well. And so let me just make sure everything's good here. We'll be looking at the 18Z run here tonight since the 0Z not quite out yet. 0Z HER is coming in as we speak. As you know, we'll take that with a grain of salt, but it's good to at least see what the models are showing for what the radar might look like going out into the future. But again, hope everyone's doing well. I know there will be some chasers out with this system, first chase of the year. So to those of you going out and chasing, be safe. Definitely, let's go a year without any chaser accidents, shall we? That's the goal for this year. I would like to think that would be the case, but with more and more folks out on the road, it's always difficult. So everyone, please be safe out there, especially with this setup. Tending toward the trees a little bit. But yeah, so we'll give it another minute or so, and then we will dive in here. We'll take a look at some current data, and then we'll look at the model data coming up for this severe weather event. Kazaki, welcome. Welcome to everybody filtering in here. Want to do at least, was going to do a full video. Was going to do a full video this afternoon. Thought it'd be better to just do a live stream, and this might be what we do going forward. Do some live streams instead of those static videos. I like that we can do a full breakdown. You guys can ask questions as we're going, and then at the end of the video, we'll do that Q&A session as always. But all right, 6:05. Let's go ahead and dive in here. So let's start out with the SPC outlooks, Storm Prediction Center outlooks. This is the day one outlook, and mind you, keep in mind that these outlooks go until 12Z the following day, basically. So this goes all the way through 6 a.m. Central Time tomorrow morning, and really, this day one outlook is going to focus on the final few hours of this period. So really, the kind of 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. Central time frame is what this outlook is going to be focused on. So this is going to be into Thursday morning, not so much a Wednesday threat. And then we continue that into the day on Thursday. Big marginal risk here for our really first widespread area of severe potential. It is still a marginal risk level 1 out of 5 in the dark green shaded region here. So that's going to include much of Oklahoma, southeast Kansas, North Texas along the Red River, over into much of Arkansas, southern 2/3 of Missouri up into Illinois, and the Mississippi Valley there, far western Tennessee, western Mississippi, far western Kentucky, and then northeast Louisiana in the marginal risk at this point. Low end all hazards risk is possible for tomorrow. There's a 2% tornado risk here in the green shading there. So it is a low-end tornado risk, and tomorrow's threat is somewhat conditional. We'll talk about why here in just a second. But the main threat is likely to be damaging wind and some isolated large hail. Particularly, the hail threat is going to focus across the Oklahoma vicinity. And I'll mention here, as always, try to keep those questions toward the end. We'll do a full Q&A session at the end of the video, and I'll answer as many questions as I can there. So that is the outlook for Thursday going into Friday morning, and then we go into Friday, day 3. That's going to be our main day of highest severe weather potential at this point. It is at a level 2 out of 5 slight risk from basically western Tennessee down through northwest Alabama, much of Mississippi, southeast and eastern Arkansas into northern and central Louisiana. So places like Alexandria, Shreveport, Jackson, Mississippi, Greenville, Memphis, Jackson, Tennessee, Birmingham, Alabama, all in that level 2 out of 5 slight risk in the yellow shaded region there. There is an all hazards threat that does appear to be the case, leaning toward more of a damaging wind and tornado risk. I'm not in love with the Friday setup. There are definitely some flies in the ointment, which we'll talk about here in just a bit. But it doesn't look like a slam dunk setup, but severe weather does look likely for Friday. And then there is not a risk out yet for Saturday, day 4, but we could see a low-end severe risk continue toward the eastern seaboard states as we go into Saturday. But again, the threat is going to peak on Friday, at least at this time. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at some data here from the SPC mesoanalysis page, starting at 500 millibars, and not much surprise here. It's this trough that's going to be our main mechanism for synoptic scale forcing for ascent in this regime. So this has been kind of meandering out here in the Pacific, desert Southwest. I'm here in Arizona right now. It is cold and rainy today, cold at least for Arizona standards. Temperatures in the low 60s and upper 50s, which is cool for us here in Arizona. But it has been a little bit unsettled here today, looking at some thunderstorms here tomorrow as a secondary trough comes through. You can see a little bit of a secondary wind maximum up there on the Northern California coast. That's going to be a second trough that will come in behind this wave and wreak havoc for the Friday setup. But this first wave is going to be our main wave for the setup for tomorrow. That's going to quickly eject off to the east, northeast, take on a nice negative tilt with time, and it should be through the central and southern plains by about midday tomorrow. So it's going to be a fast-moving trough. The main severe threat for Thursday is going to focus in the southern plains through the early half of the day, it looks like, maybe into early afternoon, and then perhaps trailing into the early to mid-afternoon portion as we go into, as it moves into Missouri, Arkansas, and Illinois tomorrow. But definitely looks to be a nice little trough ahead of this secondary trough that's moving through on Friday. And then the Friday evolution is pretty interesting. Not a typical evolution here, but it's going to be a little bit interesting how these troughs progress and interact among this flow here. So we'll go down to the surface. Not much going on at the surface at this point. Looks like we're missing the wind barbs here, but that's okay. We have the surface pressure contours. Not a ton going on at this point. Maybe a little bit of surface troughing here out across the central and southern high plains, but nothing really intense yet. That's going to change as we go into tomorrow. We're going to see a nice stout surface low develop and eject out into the Midwest, and that should give us the impetus that we need for a potential severe threat tomorrow. And then a secondary surface low is going to develop along the Gulf Coast states going into Friday and early Saturday, and that should help out with the Friday threat. But for now, not much going on. We have some ridging here out east, a little bit of troughing at the surface starting out west, but again, surface low development is expected as that upper trough starts to eject and traverse the Rockies. We should see surface low development over the next day or so as this trough ejects out into the plains. As that surface low does develop, that initial surface low, we're going to see that moisture start creeping up into our area of interest. We've already seen with this weak surface cyclogenesis here in eastern Colorado, the winds turn out of the south. That was not the case a couple days ago. Last couple days, the winds across these far southern plains have been easterly, some northerly flow early in the week, over the weekend, as a preceding cold front went through. That's not the case. The winds are out of the south now, and that has already started to pull all of this moisture, these mid to upper 60s dew points that are settled right along the coast there. the Texas coast out into the Gulf. You see a 70 dew point there out in the Gulf. That is all starting to move inland, and we should see a nice reservoir of moisture for storm development as it starts early tomorrow morning across the southern plains, Oklahoma into Texas initially. So those 60s dew points are going to rapidly advance northward, and for this time of year, low 60s dew points more than enough to foster a severe threat. All right, let's take a look at some model data here. So this is the 18Z NAM. The 0Z NAM is not quite out yet, but the 18Z should be good enough for our purposes here. So we'll start at 500 millibars as always. And again, here is our trough out across the desert southwest, western Mexico. That is going to quickly move off to the east and make its way into the southern plains overnight tonight into tomorrow morning. So this is at 9Z, 3 a.m. Central Standard Time. That trough, nice negatively tilted trough with a nice well-defined exit region, some defluence in the exit region of that trough. That is going to, again, rapidly eject into the southern plains. And out ahead of this should be plenty of forcing for storm development. We'll have ample rising motion out ahead of this negatively tilted trough. That surface low should be developing nicely as we go through the night tonight into tomorrow morning. And that should lead to plenty of forcing to initiate severe storms in this environment. Now, the question is thermodynamics here. That moisture at the surface is expected to get pretty far north with the intensity of the surface low here. Let's just go straight to the surface low. So you'll see we just kind of have that troughing. Surface low continues to develop overnight, and then really tomorrow morning, 9 to about 15Z, so 3 to 9 a.m. or so, that surface low really starts to take shape out across eastern Colorado, moving into Kansas with a trailing cold front down to the south and southwest, and a broad warm sector out ahead of that. So that low is going to really sharpen up, really try to pump that moisture like a fire hose up into the central and southern plains and give us a nice broad warm sector for convection going into tomorrow morning. So let's take a look at our moisture as well. The NAM is really pulling that moisture north. So let's take a look here. You see, as we go to right about now, as we're recording this, those 60s dew points on the NAM here out all the way up to basically the Dallas-Fort Worth region, almost to the Red River at this point. And if we look at our map right now, that is pretty accurate. This is, again, is the 18Z NAM, so this is 6 hours, about 6 to 7 hours old as it was initialized. The 60s dew point line, about right in there. So about right on target with what moisture return should be at this time. Maybe the NAM a little bit more aggressive, but still not too bad at all. And again, with those southerly winds, that's going to rapidly pump northward into Oklahoma overnight. This is 3 a.m., those 60s dew points, according to the NAM, up to Oklahoma City. Certainly a plausible scenario. Would not see any reason why that shouldn't be the case with strong low-level flow. And then by 12Z, 6 a.m., those 60s dew points all the way up to basically Highway 412 up there in northern Oklahoma, Ponca City over toward the Tulsa area. And you can see this is a pretty broad warm sector here. So we do have surface moisture. Again, low 60s dew points, pretty favorable this time of year. The question is thermodynamics. Again, we have a nice negatively tilted trough. We have some colder air aloft, I would suspect, with this trough. But it does lag behind a little bit. So that colder air not quite coming through with the trough, but still should have fairly cool temperatures aloft. This is kind of the thing here that I'm a little bit concerned about. This is the forecast sounding for 6 a.m. here in Oklahoma, right about, let's see, where do we pull this from? So right over Oklahoma City here. We have definitely some instability. We have this warm layer right above about 850 millibars or so, this layer of warm air aloft that may prohibit storms from becoming surface-based. Let's take a look at some soundings here, our observed 0Z sounding, and see if we can see what's going on here. So this is the Norman sounding. Not much to glean from this at this point. Let's go down to Dallas. We're closer. Lake Charles. So this is at Lake Charles. We're in the warm, moist air at this point. It is fairly shallow and it very warm air aloft. Now with the trough coming in, that strong forcing with the 500 millibar shortwave, you would suspect that low-level warm layer would be able to erode quite a bit. Here we are at 15Z, and I want to see the progression of the soundings from 12 to 15Z. So that's going to be 6 to 9 a.m. So this is at 6 a.m. Lots of elevated instability, about 800 joules per kilogram mixed layer CAPE, but that warm layer could prohibit storms from becoming fully surface-based. If they become fully surface-based, we may have a problem here across Oklahoma because this is our hodograph. Very strong low-level shear, upwards of 300 meters squared per second squared effective storm relative helicity, large looping hodographs there. But all this does not matter if the storms are elevated. So that's going to be the question overnight for Oklahoma, North Texas, going through the morning hours tomorrow. Will these storms be elevated? This is at 15Z, and this is a little bit concerning here because we don't really see that warm layer. As that trough starts to swing through, that warm layer disappears. That warm layer is lifted and cooled, and therefore we have surface-based instability here. 500 or so joules per kilogram, which is enough this time of year, especially with such strong forcing and such strong kinematics, deep layer shear upwards of 70 knots with strong low-level shear here. So definitely something to watch overnight. With such strong forcing, there's probably going to be a lot of convection, I would suspect, just given the degree of forcing. There's going to be a lot of storms here, it looks like. So the main question for tomorrow morning is, will storms be surface-based? If they remain elevated, then we're going to see mostly just an isolated large hail, maybe an isolated damaging wind risk here. The damaging wind risk even is decreased when you have elevated storms because that momentum transfer that occurs, strong winds getting down to the surface through thunderstorm downdrafts, they can't really penetrate that low-level stable layer when storms are elevated. But if it's that stable layer does decrease a little bit, then we may be having some issues. But overall storm mode looks to perhaps, just given the amount of forcing, looks to be more so a isolated large hail damaging wind risk. And if storms can become surface-based, then we may see a low-end brief tornado risk. And we're not talking about significant long-track tornadoes here. With storm mode being somewhat messy, I suspect we're going to see mostly just a brief tornado risk here. And our shear vectors are fairly parallel to our initiating boundary, which is going to be that dry line / cold front back out to the west, especially across Oklahoma. Shear vectors are fairly parallel, fairly strong degree of parallelness, if you will, with the shear vectors with respect to that initiating boundary, our frontal zone here. So that, coupled with the strong forcing, should lead to more of a messy storm mode and keep the overall severe risk down a little bit. Fairly sloppy looking setup. But again, if we can get surface-based instability here, we have strong low-level shear, and the low-level shear vectors, 0 to 1 kilometer shear vectors here, would look something like this. If the line is oriented along the cold front, fairly perpendicular to the line, and that would mean perhaps a greater threat for a few spin-up tornadoes within the line. So that's going to be our main severe threat for tomorrow morning. That's going to move off into the southeast Kansas, eastern Oklahoma, Missouri, northern Arkansas vicinity as we go through the morning. As the trough really starts to swing through, we'll go back to 500 millibars here and show you that trough is really rapidly moving. By 18Z, it's all the axis of the trough is all the way over here into kind of southeast Kansas, northern Arkansas, so storms will quickly move off, and behind it we'll see some subsidence. So we shouldn't really see a ton of storm development behind this line, the initial line of storms moving through. But as this trough does move through, right about, I would say, the sweet spot for this sort of a secondary regime is going to be late morning to very early afternoon, right in the kind of base of the trough and just near the surface low. So that surface low is going to be right here in eastern Kansas by noon tomorrow. And I'm looking right at this area, right behind the initial round of storms that moves through, should move through fairly quickly. And if we can get clearing on the backside of this, then we might be seeing an interesting little, not necessarily a true cold core setup per se, but we could see a very similar setup where we see cold air aloft moving in from the trough as it moved through. And then we see that surface low. You see all this instability here is really packed in the lowest levels of the atmosphere on this particular NAM run. It's not very much instability, just under 500 joules per kilogram mixed layer CAPE, but it is surface-based and it is packed in those lowest few kilometers of the atmosphere. With this much low-level shear, that definitely is a little bit of a sign that we could see some redevelopment behind the line. You see almost 100 joules per kilogram, 0 to 3 kilometer CAPE. So if storms are able to redevelop behind this line, really southeast Kansas to northeast Oklahoma behind the initial round of storms, if we can see updrafts redevelop behind that line, we could see an outside chance of a couple low-top supercells with maybe a brief tornado risk, maybe an isolated large hail risk as the shortwave swings through near that surface low in eastern Kansas. So that's something to watch. Very conditional setup. The main severe threat tomorrow morning is going to come from that first round of storms, that first line of storms that moves through 12 to 15Z or so with that brief tornado damaging wind and isolated large hail risk. But if we do get storms to redevelop behind it, and again, it's very conditional because we could see cloud cover behind that initial round of storms, it might not move out. very quickly, and then this kind of secondary regime will be squashed. But if we do see some clearing, sweet spot might be right around lunchtime or so here, southeast Kansas, far northeast Oklahoma, far southwest Missouri, northwest Arkansas. We could see a couple low-top supercells with a brief tornado and isolated large hail risk. And I think that's what the SPC is pinpointing here with this day 2 hail risk there right in the Oklahoma vicinity. Isolated large hail possible in the early round as well. But this is a kind of a classic looking sounding for some low-topped cold core-esque supercells. Again, not a cold core setup by definition because we don't have a closed 500 millibar low, but it is very similar where we're relying on 0 to 3 kilometer cape and strong thermodynamics to get the job done. With this much shear, always an eyebrow raiser here. So that is something to watch, but the main round, again, is going to be from that early round of storms, early tomorrow morning into the mid to late morning hours, especially Kansas, Oklahoma, North Texas, and moving eastward with the trough as it swings through very quickly. Let's take a look at the HRRR real quick here for tomorrow morning. This is going to be... We'll take a look. Is the 0Z out fully enough yet? Yep, it is out 24 hours. So we'll look at how this progresses. So you see all this precipitation here in West Texas. That's going to be right out ahead of that shortwave moving through. Start to see some more robust cores here, but a very messy storm mode overall. That's just due to a lot of forcing, a lot of frontal forcing, a lot of synoptic forcing here. And as we go through the morning hours tomorrow, southern Kansas, Oklahoma, down toward the Red River, could see some isolated large hail, isolated damaging wind, and maybe a brief tornado or two if storms are surface-based. And then let's see if the HRRR projects any of that secondary regime. So maybe let's go to the central sector here. I did see some model runs that had this secondary regime, and the models don't resolve these kinds of regimes very well. But you see up here as well, up closer to the surface low, maybe an area where we could see an isolated low-top storm or two. But again, I would project this area, basically Topeka southward through northeast Oklahoma, far western and southwest Missouri. That would be your area to watch for perhaps redevelopment, low-top redevelopment behind the initial line of storms. But again, very conditional risk. So that is what we have going on through the day. That line continues. Not really much robustness to that line on this particular HRRR run. Let's take a look at the ARW model here just to see what it shows as well. So here overnight, going into the morning, this is going to be the 12Z run. The 0Z is not out yet, but you see very messy convection with that early line and not much behind it. So overall, just kind of an instability-starved environment. The warmer temperatures in the low levels may be something to contend with here for the setup tomorrow morning. So still looks like a low-end severe threat with any of these regimes, but that kind of details what we're looking at for tomorrow. Then we go to Friday. Let me back it out here and show you how the mid and upper levels are going to progress here. So this is going to be midday tomorrow, that shortwave. First shortwave moves off very quickly into the mid-south and midwest, and then here is our second shortwave. Strong jet streak behind this initial jet streak. Starts digging really hard down into the desert southwest tomorrow afternoon. Very strong winds within that trough. And that is going to dig down into the southern plains. And these two are going to phase together, if you will. This shortwave moves off into the Great Lakes. And then we see this second trough take on a very positively tilted nature going into the day on Friday. And this is my big concern with this setup. So this is 12Z Friday, 6 a.m. Central Standard Time on Friday. This is at 9 noon Friday. 3 p.m., 6 p.m., 0Z Saturday, so 6 p.m. Central Standard Time on Friday. Note where our main risk area is here. Mississippi, Arkansas, Louisiana, Alabama. We're kind of not really getting any particular notable shortwaves moving through this area during the day. So let's set the stage here. We'll show you how the surface features evolve because that's going to kind of give you a better picture of where things are expected to be relative to the synoptic forcing for ascent. So again, the shortwave tomorrow will induce surface cyclogenesis, central plains moving into the Midwest, deepening rapidly as we go through the day tomorrow. Then that leaves this cold front down to the south, baroclinic zone down to the south. That was a pretty bad cold front. It looks like it's more right in there. So there's our cold front going into the early morning hours Friday. That temperature gradient kind of maintains itself through the day on Friday. And then this secondary shortwave starts to overspread this baroclinic zone during the afternoon on Friday. And then we see secondary low, surface low development along the Gulf Coast Friday evening, late afternoon into evening, and that may allow things to pick up, at least kinematically, Friday night into early Saturday morning. So that is going to allow for a pretty broad warm sector here. So we'll start tomorrow evening. Again, all those blues are your 60-degree dew points. So you see all those dark blues moving inland, pretty broad warm sector by midday. Friday, this is 18Z on Friday, broad warm sector all the way up into Tennessee and western Kentucky. But this is a lot of real estate here. And anytime you have a lot of real estate here, you have to be cognizant that we could have multiple rounds of storms in here. And just note where this is. So this is 18Z, East Texas over toward the moisture axis looks to be Mississippi into Louisiana, where that deepest or that most robust moisture is. 21Z, 0Z. Doesn't really move much throughout the day. So there is our warm sector on Friday evening. Let's compare that to where our forcing is. So I'm going to back it out here, and here we are at 0Z. So really our warm sector looks maybe something like this. All the forcing's kind of back here to the west. It's a positively tilted trough, a little bit strung out, and it's hanging back to the west a little bit. We've seen this change a little bit over the last couple of days. And so let me show you the last few model runs here. So valid at 0Z, 6 p.m. tomorrow. And notice the last few runs have been a little bit, we've seen sort of a trend toward this more western solution, especially in the last couple runs. So here was our trough, a little bit stronger flow out to the east here. And then watch where that axis goes. We shift it back to the west a little bit. You can really see it between this 12Z run and the 18Z run. Little bit slower trend here on the NAM with our trough, and that is not good for this open warm sector. With the open warm sector so far out to the east relative to where the synoptic forcing is, would be mostly confined to the southern plains. It starts to overspread that western extent of the warm sector by late afternoon to early evening. But really, most of the warm sector is not really experiencing any sort of short waves or anything through the day. And you watch here, I'll zoom into the southeast as well, looking for height falls over the warm sector as well. So watch these black lines. These are our geopotential height contours, the height of the 500 millibar surface above mean sea level. And we want to see these moving from left to right. That means lower heights are coming into this region if they were to do so, and that would lead to height falls over the warm sector. And height falls are a way for synoptic forcing for ascent to take place. So we'll start Friday evening. Just keep your eyes on these black lines. We don't really see any eastward movement of these height contours through the day on Friday, especially over the warm sector, until we get pretty late in the period. This is Saturday morning. We start to see the trough finally move east, and then those heights kind of lower over the warm sector. So that is going to be a big negative for open warm sector convection in this regime. You really do need some type of short wave over the warm sector, even if you have confluence bands at the surface, little areas of convergence at the surface over the open warm sector. You need some synoptic forcing for ascent to allow those storms to become mature and sustain. And I'm just not seeing that at this point. So that's a big positive for folks in this region, is that warm sector convection may struggle on Friday. But we do have other surface mechanisms that may help overcome that. It just means convection is going to be tied to the frontal zones, basically, where the surface low is and where the frontal zones are. The open warm sector convection, I'm definitely a little bit skeptical as of how that could play out. I'm not really seeing a lot of impetus for open warm sector convection. But we will have our cold front here back to the west. We saw our warm sector doesn't really change shape. We'll have our baroclinic zone back out here to the west. Frontal zone kind of right in here. And then as that surface low develops along the Gulf Coast, we'll see probably something like this. That's right where our wind shift is here. So Pacific front, dry line, cold front, whatever you want to call it. Back here to the west, warm front that was kind of the cold front from our initial surface low that moves into the Midwest Thursday into Friday, right there. And then the eastern extent of our warm sector over here. So the western portions of the warm sector are going to see a little bit better chance for those height falls to come in. So southwest Arkansas, east Texas, western Louisiana, best chances for severe weather, I think, are going to be tied to these frontal zones come Friday. And even along the warm front as well, we could see some severe storms out there. But again, the open warm sector, I think, is going to remain somewhat quiet, at least through the daytime hours on Friday. As the trough moves east Friday into Saturday morning, we could see some ramp up in intensity here of these storms out over the open warm sector. But I just think the lack of synoptic forcing over the warm sector is going to keep the warm sector threat at bay. And storms are going to be tied to this frontal zone. So we'll see storms develop along this frontal zone here during the afternoon hours, perhaps even as early as the late morning to early afternoon hours on Friday along these frontal zones. So western portions of the risk area may be seeing the greatest threat for severe weather initially with this setup. And we'll have plenty of moisture here as well. Plenty of moisture in the open warm sector. This is at 18Z. We'll take a sounding kind of western Louisiana to show you here. And we'll take a look at the low-level jet as well in just a second. So overall, we're kind of stuck between surface lows here. We talked about how that secondary surface low is going to develop. The NAM has it developing kind of late in the period. Here you see a little bit better cyclogenesis here. This is 6Z Saturday, so this is midnight on Friday night into Saturday morning. The surface low starts to become much more defined. But that's pretty late in the period, through about 0Z, not really seeing that. So that low-level flow is somewhat on the weaker side here. And that translates to a somewhat weak low-level jet. Now, we're going to have a low-level jet trailing this surface low up here, probably trailing down into the portions of the mid-south. But I want to show you here the low-level jet and how it's progressed over the last couple of runs. Last few runs have had this low-level jet maintaining itself, at least a lobe of this strong flow just above the surface. They've had that maintaining itself over the entire area of interest through the day on Friday. That would keep that low-level shear really strong so that any storms that do form on Friday, they would have that damaging wind and tornado risk. But watch here what's happened over the past couple of runs. So here's our low-level jet. We'll start at 21Z here. So this is going to be 3 p.m. Central Standard Time on Friday. You see out to the west, fairly minimal, 850 millibar flow, 20-25 knots at most maybe, which is on the weak side, with a lobe of that low-level jet here, eastern Mississippi, northeastward into Alabama, Georgia, and Tennessee. So that would be where your strongest low-level flow is. This has been a change from previous runs. So this is the 12Z run. This is yesterday's runs. You see a lot more of that low-level jet in the past few runs had been extending down into even East Texas and much of Louisiana. That is not the case anymore, and I'm interested to see what the 0Z run of the NAM shows, because we've seen a significant decrease in the low-level jet over the warm sector in the last several runs. That's going to decrease the low-level shear over the warm sector and lead to perhaps less of a threat for tornadic storms in this regime, especially with storms, again, I think tied to those frontal zones back out farther west, East Texas, Louisiana, Southwest Arkansas. Even weaker low-level flow out here. So those hodographs, as you see here, are very, very straight. These are very straight hodographs, not really all that indicative of tornadic supercells with such weak low-level shear. Strong deep layer shear to support severe weather. And also thermodynamically, this is not going to be a very favorable look here because the main trough is sticking back so far to the west, and it's not that negatively tilted trough. We just did a video on the April 28th event from last year, the big moderate risk in Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa that kind of underperformed. Same kind of thing here, positively tilted trough. We don't get those super favorable kinematics and thermodynamics to take place because of the trough geometry. And it looks like the same is going to be here. You see, this is not overly favorable for super robust storms. A little bit of a warm nose there at 850 millibars or just above 850 millibars. Not super steep lapse rates aloft, very skinny cape here. So all in all, this is not a very favorable look for a really, truly robust setup here out in these areas. We'll take one here at 0Z, a little bit farther into the warm sector maybe at 0Z, so 6 p.m. on Friday evening. Not much change here. We have enough instability to support robust convection, but these hodographs are not all that favorable for tornadic supercells. Very weak low-level shear, mostly stick-straight hodographs. So that's going to lead to more of a large hail and damaging wind risk. And I think more so a damaging wind risk, especially with a lack of really robust thermodynamics, would be more just a damaging wind threat on Friday. So that's some good news here, at least as the NAM has shown it. We'll get a little bit better clarity as we go into tomorrow and Friday morning how things are going to play out. But for now, lots of flies in the ointment with this setup. Now, as the trough starts to really move off to the east, you see it does start to swing through to the east going into Saturday morning. We see some slight subtle height falls over the warm sector here. That cold front's going to shift east as that secondary surface low moves through. You see it moves off into Tennessee by 15Z Saturday. That cold front's going to be trailing it. That could lead to an uptick in severe storms. We should see low-level flow increase as that secondary surface low develops as well. You see that with the 850 millibar progression into Saturday morning. So with any complexes of storms or any storms that are ongoing into Saturday morning, we could see that tornado threat ramp up overnight and into Saturday morning across Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, southern Tennessee. But again, we're going to have to just wait and see how things play out. But this would lead to much stronger low-level shear with that secondary surface cyclogenesis. The warm sector here on the NAM is back here to the west, interestingly enough, and then it pinches off pretty quickly. But say we have storms ongoing into Saturday morning, they would be going into this kind of environment, which has much stronger low-level shear. Fairly weak instability, but you don't need a ton with these strong of kinematics. Strong deep layer shear, upwards of 60 knots of effective bulk shear, strong low-level shear, 250 or so meters squared per second squared of storm relative helicity in the effective layer. So that would be a more favorable environment for perhaps some tornadic activity going into Saturday morning. So I think the time frame to watch here for the most part is going to be Friday evening into Saturday morning, when that secondary surface low starts to ramp up and when that low-level jet starts to ramp up again over the warm sector. But again, for Friday, not seeing a ton to write home about as far as a really significant severe weather event, as the forcing's a little bit too far back to the west and storms going to be confined to the cold front, likely a messy mode pretty quickly, I would suspect, as that trough starts to overspread the cold front. And then we see storms kind of congeal, and then as that trough finally swings through, we might see that those complexes continue into the overnight hours, Friday into Saturday, into some stronger low-level shear that could foster a little bit of a ramp-up in spin-up tornado production and some damaging wind. So that'll be something to watch, and we'll be back with more updates as that becomes clearer. Right now, we're just going to have to wait and see how things play out the next couple of days, especially with tomorrow into Friday, and then we'll have a little bit better idea of how Friday is going to go there, and we'll be back with more updates as that happens. How about some cams here? The 0Z HER, let's go to 0Z here. We're almost out 48 hours. I'll shift it here to the southern southeast U.S. sector. Actually, maybe let's go to the southern plains sector, since we've seen maybe a little bit of a westward shift in things here. So this is going tomorrow, and then Friday, you see. So the HER is pretty insistent here on some confluence bands going into Friday morning, interestingly enough, across Louisiana and Mississippi. I would suspect there's not a ton of instability that far east. So I don't know about that. We do see, and then you see by late morning on Friday, back along that cold front in East Texas and western Louisiana, lots of messy convection firing along that. Will this stuff out here be able to sustain itself? Again, I'm skeptical because of the lack of synoptic forcing. You see some confluence bands possibly coming in off the Gulf as well. Will those be able to sustain? I'm skeptical. And this is as far out as it goes, unfortunately. But from what we've talked about from meteorology-wise so far, it just doesn't look like all that robust of an event Friday. Again, Friday night into Saturday morning could be our prime time for tornadic activity. But overall, you guys are saying it in the chat, it looks definitely pretty sloppy at this point. But still, that doesn't mean we're not going to see severe weather. This band along the cold front will likely have some severe weather in it. And then if any storms can get going in the warm sector, they would have that greater risk for a few tornadoes and some damaging winds and maybe isolated large hail, although I think the hail threat's going to be fairly low given those weak thermodynamics. But I think those storms sustaining in the warm sector is a little bit on the probabilities for that are a little bit on the low side here. All right, so that is going to wrap things up here for now. Again, as I said, we will be back with additional videos and streams as necessary as this event becomes closer, especially the Friday event, Friday into Saturday event. Friday morning, we might do another stream if time allows. But for tonight, again, this is for mostly tomorrow morning. A few strong to severe storms starting as early as 2 to 3 a.m. or so out across West Texas and western Oklahoma, shifting off to the northeast. These are expected to be elevated for the first several hours of their life cycle here. So mainly an isolated large hail and isolated damaging wind threat with those. And then things get a little bit more interesting tomorrow morning. That first band of storms could attain some type of tornado risk as it moves off to the east into southeast Kansas and eastern Oklahoma, southwest Missouri, into northwest Arkansas. Given that we have perhaps a decrease in the low-level stability by that time, as the NAM suggested, that's conditional. If the storms stay elevated, tornado risk would be very low, but we could see some spin-up tornadoes with such strong low-level shear tomorrow morning, and there is a 2% risk out for that. Eastern Oklahoma, eastern half of Oklahoma, all the way back to Oklahoma City, the Oklahoma City metro area, Norman, eastward, Tulsa, Springfield, Little Rock, Memphis, Greenville, Jackson, in that 2% for tomorrow morning mostly, and then into the afternoon as things move off to the east. Damaging wind and isolated large hail threat. We could get that second round of storms behind the main round, eastern Kansas down into northeast Oklahoma, far southwest Missouri, with that goes cold core-esque storms. But we'll see. That's very conditional at this point. And then the day 3 outlook, slight risk, level 2 out of 5 risk for the southeast. Would not be surprised to see this shifted back to the east a little bit, or back to the west a little bit into eastern Texas, just given the positioning of where things are on the latest models. But that remains to be seen. I think, again, most of this stuff is going to be tied to the frontal zones here, so that warm front and the cold front back out to the west. Given the lack of synoptic forcing over the warm sector, if storms can sustain over the open warm sector, which is in question given the lack of forecasting, then we may see a higher tornado risk in the warm sector. But for now, I think stuff's going to mainly stick, at least robust stuff's going to mainly stick to the frontal zones through the day on Friday with that damaging wind and isolated tornado risk, maybe some large hail as well, but mostly damaging wind threat. And then Friday night into Saturday morning out here across Mississippi, Alabama, southern Tennessee, northwest Georgia, if we'll have stronger low-level shear with that secondary surface low developing, and we could see the tornado risk ramp up within any storm complexes that are ongoing, any storms in the warm sector that are able to sustain. That could be something to watch, but again, it's in question at this point. We'll have to see how things play out for that. All right, so that is going to wrap things up. If anybody has any questions, please fire them in the chat now. I'm happy to answer them. So let me know any questions y'all have in the chat, and then we'll wrap this thing up. So looks like a decent little severe setup, but definitely some flies in the ointment as far as a really robust setup. I would be honestly a little surprised if they upgrade from this at this point, but we'll see. Right now, I just think there are too many flies in the ointment with this setup, especially on Friday, to warrant a slight risk. We'll have to watch that overnight period, Friday into Saturday. But for now, I think the slight risk is adequate. With the equilibrium level being about 500 millibars, do you think that will stop anything from happening in northeast Kansas tomorrow? So again, right on the surface low there may be something to watch. I think northeast Kansas will be mainly depending on if moisture gets all the way up there, which the NAM kind of has it getting up there, but it moves off to the east pretty quickly. Right along the surface low, right ahead of the shortwave, could be something to watch there. Far eastern Kansas into western Missouri, Kansas City area, maybe. Need to watch for that low-topped convection that is conditional but may fire behind the main round tomorrow morning. Southeast Nebraska looks unlikely. I just don't think moisture is going to get all the way up there, and the NAM certainly agrees with that. Just no moisture to support storms up there. North Texas in the early morning tomorrow, same thing applies for North Texas. The trailing end of the convection will be there, and they'll have plenty of moisture. So could see that isolated damaging wind and large hail risk across North Texas, mainly closer to the Red River. I think most of the threat's going to be over Oklahoma and southern Kansas, but down along the Red River, just into Texas, we could see that isolated severe threat. And if storms become surface-based, that low-end tornado risk is possible. Central Illinois tomorrow night, you are in the marginal risk, so a low-end severe risk, mainly just isolated damaging wind gusts up there. Instability with northward extent is going to be a lot weaker, so I don't suspect anything robust making its way up there. Very limited instability, so mainly just an isolated damaging wind gust possible there. Let's see. Your annual tornado season forecast will be out in late February. I like to get as much information as possible before I make any calls for the season, especially with ENSO and stuff like that. We're going through some transitions now, so we'll let those kind of settle down, get a better idea how those are going to play out, and then I like to release that usually the last week of February. Do you think convection prior to the main event will hinder instability a lot? Not really. I don't think so. I think I think there's just some problems with trough geometry, so that you're not going to get that cooling aloft where you need it. There's going to be some warm layers aloft that are just not ideal. So I think it's more so just the imperfections in the instability profile already, rather than convection hindering the overall threat, antecedent convection hindering the overall threat. Southern Indiana, would be very surprised if there's anything up there. You are not in a risk area as of yet. Maybe just a general thunderstorms at this point, but I would keep an eye out. But I don't think Southern Indiana is going to have enough instability to support severe weather up there. If the flies in the ointment slowly went away or decreased, would an enhanced risk make sense? Of course, if we had better instability and better forcing over the warm sector, then we'd be talking about a more robust tornado risk over the warm sector with warm sector supercells. But right now, that just doesn't look like it. But if things improve, then we definitely can see that. And again, that Friday night, Saturday morning period could be something to watch for a risk upgrade, or at least a risk extension out here farther east. But that remains to be seen. Looked at a few model soundings for the Birmingham area overnight Friday. While there was only around 500 Cape, it was good shear and low LCLs. Yeah, overnight Friday, definitely need to watch out there. Mississippi, Alabama, Northwest Georgia, Southern Tennessee, maybe even Eastern Louisiana, Eastern Arkansas as well. Greenwood, Mississippi tornado threat for Friday again. It just remains to be seen. That's going to be mostly during the day. Warm sector convection, which I just am not seeing a lot of support for that, at least robust warm sector convection. But Friday night into Saturday morning, definitely need to keep an eye out there. Let's see if the 0Z HER is out a little bit farther now. We can maybe see a little bit farther out in time. So here, that's the 18Z run. Here's 0Z. So this is Friday morning. So you see a lot of that just kind of crappy convection along the frontal zones to the west. Not much in the warm sector. This is midday Friday. We do see, I don't buy this at all. I really just don't buy this at all. That's a lot of convection in the warm sector with not much forcing to allow for that. So right now I would think this is a little bit of an outlier. And again, we're 2 days out, so the HER doesn't do well. Doesn't do well for warm sector setups anyway. But I think that's just way too much convection in the warm sector. And it is messy anyway. Just a lack of focused forcing in the warm sector, not all that great. If we do get this amount of convection, then we need to watch out for sure. I wonder what the models, the HER is showing as far as a profile for that out ahead of those storms. But I don't buy that really. We talked about how far west the synoptic trough is going to be. That's just a lot of convection. I don't really buy that at all. This is later Friday too, but it starts firing up Friday afternoon. The trough finally does start to shift eastward Friday night into Saturday morning, so we might start getting those height falls over the warm sector by this point. So by Friday evening, we might start to see an increase in the robustness of these storms, and then that tornado and damaging wind risk would ramp up a little bit. But let's see here. We'll take 21Z. We'll take one right there north of Lake Pontchartrain just to see. And so this would favor supercells and robust convection. We do have a little bit of a warm nose there, and this is convectively contaminated just a little bit, but a little bit of a warm nose there, right at about 700 millibars. Is that enough to keep things at bay? Remains to be seen. There is enough low-level shear and deep layer shear to support supercells. So we're just going to have to wait and see. This warm sector threat's a wait-and-see thing. Again, I don't think we're going to see this amount of convection in the warm sector, given that we have just a lack of forcing. How about 0Z, just to see? And this is when things could get interesting. So Friday evening to Saturday morning, we have a lot more instability here, a lot less warm air aloft, and stronger low-level shear with the ramp up of the low-level jet as that secondary surface low develops. So that's the period I'm really watching, Friday evening into Saturday morning. So I would say that. But again, this is just a cam. So take it with a grain of salt. We need to see how tomorrow plays out into Friday morning to really get an idea of how things might progress. Just real quick, the NAM nest at 18Z. And it doesn't have a ton here. Maybe tries to develop a few supercells out in the open warm sector, but this looks more like it, honestly. And this is an old run, and this is the NAM nest. You know I hate the NAM nest, but it doesn't really fire anything robust in the warm sector. And it kind of keeps it a little bit at bay there. Big change from what the HURB was showing. So model cams are all over the place for the warm sector Friday. We're just going to have to wait and see how it plays out. I think a 5% will be coming for Friday. I think that's adequate for now, and we may see some shifts in that as we go forward. Any other flies in the ointment with the cold core setup other than storm initiation uncertainties? Not really. That's the main thing. Just will those storms actually fire behind the main round on tomorrow, late morning to afternoon? And that is usually the case with these cold core-esque type setups. And you see here the NAM, it kind of has this. It has the initial stuff, and then it has a little bit of activity behind it. The cams don't do well with these kinds of these very subtle and cold core setups. When you have weak instability, the cams just don't do all that great. They're not going to show really robust helicity streaks or anything. But the fact that the NAM is showing redevelopment of convection tomorrow afternoon is something to watch. So really it's just, will we get enough clearing behind the morning round for that secondary round? Let's see. What about Iowa and Illinois? We talked about Iowa and Illinois here just earlier. Illinois likely to see most of any threat, very, very low end threat for the southern half of the state. Iowa looks clear here for any severe weather. All right, any other questions here, please fire them in the chat. Otherwise, we will wrap this up. Lots of things that need to play out here going forward, and we just don't know all that yet. Lots of nuances that we won't know until the morning of the event of each individual day. Like tomorrow morning, we'll be able to see how this initial round goes through the Southern Plains and if we get destabilization behind it. And then Friday, we'll get a better idea. We'll hone in where that trough is exactly going to be. Do we have any little waves in the warm sector to help out open warm sector supercells? So we're just going to have to wait and see, as is the case with a lot of these setups. Storm mode looks very sloppy with this event, which would lower the tornado risk. Yeah, as I said, I think Friday especially, most of the convection is going to be confined to the frontal zones. So you're going to tend to be a lot messier there. And then we'll have to watch for that open warm sector convection Friday evening into Saturday. Yeah, lapse rates are flies in the ointment. That's what we've been talking about. Really, just the instability here. These profiles are very much hampered by some instability concerns. Friday, as we talked about here. So we'll take one in East Texas there. And the lapse rate is just all part of instability. And you see here this, warm nose there at 700 millibars. That's going to weaken the lapse rates there. Not a ton of cold air aloft given the positioning of the trough. So, yes, lapse rates are part of the problem with this setup. Greenwood, Mississippi, just thunder and heavy rain. No. Again, it's a wait-and-see thing for Greenwood, Mississippi and vicinity. But as I said, Friday evening into Saturday morning, you're going to have to watch out for potentially an uptick in the severe threat with an all-hazards risk possible. So definitely keep an eye out there. Through the day, Friday, may see an isolated severe threat, but I think that's going to hang out west, and then stuff may come through Friday evening into Saturday morning. Instability during the afternoon tomorrow in the Ohio Valley on the weaker side. should be on the weaker side. You see here, I will bring it up here. So you see those red outlines, those are lifted index values, and you see they just get sapped. Even though there's some moisture there, that instability just gets sapped as you go farther into the afternoon. So Ohio Valley should be just a very low end risk if any storms can mature. Cold core threat in southeast Kansas, southwest Missouri for tornadoes are just severe in general. Would be a brief tornado risk with that secondary cold core-esque round of storms. Brief tornado risk, isolated large hail, and isolated damaging winds. So isolated all hazards risk. Lapse rates lower in winter compared to spring. It depends. You can get they're all kind of relative to the time of year, so you can get really steep lapse rates this time of year, even with cooler surface temperatures. If you have colder air aloft. So it just depends. Obviously, we do get warmer in the summer, but 3 to 6 kilometer lapse rate, for example, in this sounding is at 7.1. That's a typical value you might see in the springtime. So it doesn't really matter the season, but you can get robust lapse rates any time of year. If the only flies in the ointment for this event got better was the lapse rates in short waves, would a 10% tornado risk make sense? Yeah, I mean, if the flies in the ointment go away, then there's going to be a more robust severe threat. So, the tornado risk is going to depend on that storm mode, which we talked about. It's going to be messy unless we get warm sector convection. So yes, it all hinges on that. Right now, I think a 5% is more than adequate for Friday. We'll see what happens as we go forward in time. It's just kind of a wait and see deal. So thermos for northern Alabama. Weak until, at least on the NAM, it looks fairly limited until about Saturday morning, early Saturday morning. So, but that could change. So keep that in mind. But plenty of low-level moisture, lots of low-level shear, fairly weak skew tees here. So very skinny instability profiles, but that's enough this time of year. So if things change, are you going to do another live tomorrow? Probably not tomorrow, but Friday morning. Because again, this as nuanced as this setup is, we really need to get as much data as we can get in to allow us to have a really good picture of what's going on. So I would be back Friday morning with another stream if that is likely going to be back Friday morning with some type of content, likely a live stream. But we'll see how it goes. With the information we have now, where would you draw the 5%? I mean, anywhere in the slight risk here, really anywhere in the slight risk. Maybe extending it, as we said, back out into East Texas, given where the NAM had the warm sector. And then I might extend it off to the east here, and then probably cut it off somewhere right in there maybe. And I expect we'll see some changes to the outlook lines with the upcoming outlook. So, but let's see. Mobile, Alabama looking, and what time is it coming? Mobile should be on alert here Friday night into Saturday morning. So Friday, even late afternoon Friday into Saturday morning is when I would be on alert in the Mobile, Alabama area. But it's kind of a wait and see deal at this point. Local news in Chicago was mentioning damaging winds and possible spin-ups being a low threat. No, I really don't think Chicago will be in it. I just don't think instability is going to get up there. Now, never say never, but as we see here, this is the moisture. Maybe you might eke out a little bit of instability up there, but it's going to be very, very minimal. And so this is early Friday. Strong low-level shear. Maybe. So with this kind of a sounding, maybe. Very, very limited instability, but it is packed in those lowest couple kilometers. So with that much low-level shear, maybe. So Chicago area, keep an eye out. I think the severe weather threat overall is low. For this would be Thursday into Friday morning, late Thursday and Friday morning, but maybe non-zero at this point. I wouldn't worry too much about it, but just keep an eye out just in case. One hell of a Hotel 69. Thank you for that comment. I really appreciate that. I'm glad it's been helpful for you. I saw earlier you want the videos to come back. we'll see how it goes. I wanted to try the live streaming thing in the off season. I do the storm chasing tours during the spring, so I'll be out on the road a lot. So live streams might actually make a bit more sense for me. That way I don't have to edit a video and then take time for it to render and stuff. I can just have the live stream and it's out right away. But we'll see how that goes going into the season. It just all kind of depends on timing. But regardless, there will be some type of content with the streams or videos going forward, and the streams are always accessible after the fact. So, but I appreciate the kind words. Strong tornadoes unlikely. Watching that Friday night to Saturday morning period, but for perhaps an uptick, but we'll see at this point. Strong tornadoes do not look like a threat at the moment. Acadiana, Vermilion Bay on Friday. Let's see. Oh, all the way up there. Oh, Louisiana. That makes more sense. Pardon me. So yeah, Friday would keep an eye out for that all hazards potential. Friday night into Saturday morning for sure. So for that area. Yeah, I like the live streams because I can do the Q&A session. I do answer comments as best I can with the static videos, but the live streams allow us to do these Q&As, which is a little bit better, but we'll just see how it goes. So Nick, thank you for the kind words there. I'm glad the content has been helpful. All right, so that's going to wrap things up for this live stream. Hopefully this kind of laid out what we're expecting at this point. As we said, there's a lot of nuances with this setup. So we'll just have to see how it goes day by day. And I will likely be back Friday morning with another video or live stream, perhaps a live stream. We'll see how it goes with the updated data as we go through the day. And I'll have at minimum a post out tomorrow morning updating the threat for tomorrow. I'm sure these outlook lines are going to change with the day one outlook here, but we will have an update tomorrow on all the social media pages and here on YouTube with a community post tomorrow morning, and then perhaps a live stream Friday morning. So South Carolina Saturday, it doesn't look like much at this point, but again, we're going to have to wait and see how Friday goes for that. Atlanta, I would keep an eye out Friday night to Saturday morning for a potential threat, but it is on the lower end side. Are you staying up to chase in my backyard? No chasing for me. I'm out in Arizona visiting some family for the new year, so I will not be chasing this. I'll be focusing on getting the videos out for you guys and the updates out as needed. So yeah, that's going to do it. I appreciate you all for tuning in. Thanks as always for being viewers. Thanks all for your support. I very much appreciate it. Everyone out there in the risk areas for the next couple of days, stay safe, have those weather radios handy, and have multiple sources of receiving warnings, multiple ways of receiving warnings, and we'll get through this just fine. So thanks everybody for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.